Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Aristotle's Politics. Today we're starting book 5, chapter 1 of book 5. This is the famous chapter on metobole in politics. This is the physics of the politics, right? Metobole is the Greek word for change, why things change, metobole. Now, Lord, in much of the tradition, translate this as revolution. But the problem with revolution is it's too drastic a term. I mean, in the sense that our understanding of revolution is defined by the French Revolution, um, uh, um, and the in the Russian Revolution. This idea of this total turning around, overturning of of the society and uh, radically altering the structures. Um, while that is a form of thing, or something that Aristotle will argue that is occurring, but he's really more talking about a change from one regime to another regime type, and not really a total change of the society in the sense that while all regimes on all revolution in the current sense is a form of change, metabole, not all changes are revolutions. Okay, like we would say that the idea that the creation of the New Deal did not. Yes, it did change our system, but it did not Russian revolution everything. Okay, it was a change. It was a revolution in that sense. In other words, either we have to understand revolution in terms of we understand revolution in the most benign sense that everything's a revolution, like in every election in England where the party changes, that's a change, right? From conservative to labor that's a revolution in Aristotle's term, in a sense, change of government. Now, America is change of there's no really change of government in the British sense because we have yes parties come and go, but there's no government in the British sense and that or parliamentary sense where all is because the executive and legislative are unified in most parliamentary structures. In America, the executive and the legislative are independent. So you can have a president of one party and a Congress of and of another, and still there is and the court is another part of the division of functions. That therefore there's no real change of government in the sense of the British. Um, um, but there's been changes, though. In other words, we have a different thing. We have changes of administration in different Congresses. Each 2 years, a new Congress, right? So we have change, continual change. Change is always in life. Life is always change, and there's always going to be change in this sense. But there's also going to be the opposite of this: preservation and change. There's going to be trying to also for change for what? There's good change and there's bad change, right? That's the whole nature of what we're dealing with. So Aristotle is discussing here metobole. That's the word he's using. It metobole, change. I'm going to change that every time I see revolution. I'm going to say change because I think what he does here by calling it another problem with revolution is the word revolution. Yes, it counters us in terms of the French Revolution. We think of the Russian Revolution as just turmoils. But we also understand the word revolution, revolve, right? Revolution. This calls into mind from Plato's the cycle of regimes. This change of one cycle from, the best regime to the rule of the warriors to the rule of the wealthy, then to the rule of the people, and then a tyranny, and then a cycle, which Polybius himself works on and gives us the cycle for, which then people like then later medieval writers would do this, the cycle of revolution, and they will attribute this to Aristotle. Now, Aristotle himself rejects that there's a cycle like this. He doesn't think that there is a cycle like this. In fact, he deals with this at the end of the book 5, chapter 12 of 5. He responds to Plato and challenges Plato or Socrates' account of this, arguing that this is incorrect. This is not, that change does not follow a pattern like this, simple pattern. And But the moderns, with Machiavelli following Polybius, gives a cycle, and that there is this idea of cycle. There's a cycle, this inevitable cycle. And so that's another problem with revolution by saying revolution, because the revolution implies a cycle, a revolve. Uh, no, this is change of regime, change. That's about it. So I'm going to preface this, and I'm not going to keep on doing this. I will make reference to people to go watch the first chapter of here from this point on. I kind of raised this issue in the previous a previous video, but I'm not. I'll if I did this every time, this is going to take a 5-minute spiel. I don't want to do that continually. Uh, Here, okay, let's go right into it. Right into the chapter one. Nearly everything else that we've intended to speak about has been treated. Now, yes and no. We haven't really had this real discussion. People argue that book four. It all depends. Was book six really moved as separate? Okay. I argue that it probably was. That what happened was that, maybe it's possible that book six was pushed out for some reason after book five by an editor. Don't know. This is the problem of the Aristotle's text in that sense, the ordering of the books. Um, I would argue that six. Some people argue six is a total appendix. That this is a kind of appendix repeating thing. But no, six in my opinion is the institute. It is there where he talks about instituting establishing regimes, which he talked about doing. Everyone thinks the establishing regimes is 14, 15, and 16. But no, that's the institutional aspect of regimes. Okay? So, and in the beginning of four, he said, I'm going to talk about change, preservation, and change. So now he says, this is what he says, for has been spoken of. Everything else we've previously spoken about, but he says, but things bringing about change in regimes and how many and what sort they are. What are the sources of destructions for each sort of regime? And to which sort of regime a regime most particularly transformed? Further, what are the sources of preservation for both for regimes in common and for regimes separately? And further, what things each sort of regime might most particularly be preserved by? These matters must be investigated in conformity what has been spoken of earlier. So this is he's spelling out what he's going to do in five. So therefore the question of what are the what brings about, why do revolutions happen, or why do change in regimes happen? What are the sources for political change, right? Okay, and how many and what sort? Okay, then what are the sources of destruction for each sort of regime? And what is and how does a regime move into what is the tendency of why a regime goes from one to another thing? So this is the destruction and change, destruction of the seams, and then how does it transform from one to another? And then we deal with the question of preservation of regimes, and then further how they can be both in terms of the generally how they preserve generally, and how they're preserved by regime type, right? Um, this is what promised. Now he won't deliver what's promised. We'll notice this. What will be delivered here will be drastically different than what is. The ordering will be different, and he will add something and do it in a certain way that changes the discussion. Um, and then the last is for what regimes, what each type of regime might be preserved by. Right? He said, "I'm going to do it the same way or the other way." It is necessary first to take as the beginning point the arche, beginning point, the fact that there are many sorts of regimes, that many sorts of regimes have risen because, while all agree regarding justice and proportional equality, they err about this. has been said earlier. Now, this is alludes to book 3, chapter 9, verses 1, 1 to 4, and actually in book 4, chapter 12, the first and second paragraph sections. So therefore, in other words, all regimes think what they're doing is just and equitable, but they aren't. But it's a presupposition. It's their opinion about this. They think they add their weight to it and require people to do it. Right. So that's again between law and justice. Right. They believe that what they're doing, law is the regime's opinion about what is just and what is right, and what is equitable. But they err, right? This is what he said both in book 3 and also book 4:12. The rule of the people arose as a result of those who are equal in many respects, supposing they're simply equal. Okay, for because all alike are free persons, they consider themselves to be equal simply. So if you believe you're equal and you believe everyone's equal, then it's democratic. This is the rule of the people. And oligarchy arose as a result of those who are unequal in some respect, conceiving themselves to be wholly unequal. For as they are unequal in regard to property, they conceive themselves to be unequal simply. So one of the principles he says is this question of equality and not inequality. That's one of the forces. Then the former claim to merit, the former claim merit, taking part in all things equally on the grounds that they're equal, while the latter seek to aggrandize themselves on grounds that they're unequal, hence greater is something unequal. Right? This is number 2. Aristotle alludes here to the etymology of pilokletin, to aggrandize themselves, which literally means to seek to have more than, or to take as a greater share. So he's playing with the words, language of the thing. The word to aggrandize themselves is palentokleinin, which literally means to seek to have more, to take a greater share. So therefore, he's playing on the language here. This is why it's very interesting. He's playing on the language. He's looking at the language, very Heideggerian, right? This is a very Heidegger does the same thing with language. This is the language of it, and look at the thing and plays with the word of it. Where does it come from? And this is the literal meaning of the word. This is where it origins. He's punning it from the second. So that they're unequal. That all regimes of this kind have then a certain sort of justice, but in an unqualified sense, they are in error. In other words, all regimes make a claim about justice, and it's partially so. In other words, this is the problem of Plato's Republic, Book 1, that the 3 arguments about justice are true, but not simply true. Okay, they're partially true, or there is some truth, but not simply true or universally true. Here's the same thing happening. All the regimes, except tyranny, make a claim about justice. Okay, and they're partially true, but not absolutely true. Only the best regime makes what its claim is, and even there's the question about this, right? In other words, again, but in an unqualified sense, they are in error, right? And it is for this reason that when either group does not partake in the regime on the basis of the conception that it happens to have, they engage in stasis. This is the word stasis. Stasis. Stasis in the Greek, the English word stasis has this idea of frozen. What stasis in Greek means is to stand up. Literally is to stand up and make this. Now, it can also mean freezing, but also can mean to act against, to kind of protest, to force, to take action against, to act against, to stand up and to say no. but it's also frozen. It's stopped, right? This is the difference of stasis. And Lord constantly translates this as factional conflict. I'm going to call it stasis. I'll say stasis. This is a kind of a strife. It's strife is the most extreme version of stasis. There's this, and civil war is the most extreme. Civil war is the most extreme strife. Not all strife is civil war. And this is, I have an article out there that I'm working on it. This is with Thucydides and Hobbes. And remember, Hobbes is the first real English translator of Thucydides' Peloponnesian War. Hobbes is understanding that all strife, all dispute leads strife, and all strife leads to civil war. And therefore, the civil war is the war all against all. And this is horrifying, unlivable. We must escape. The worst thing is civil war. Civil war is death in Hobbes. I consider Hobbes as a Thucydianistic understanding of stasis, where stasis only is this extreme thing. Aristotle's stasis is not good, but it is also not that it is a range. Not every form of stasis is a civil war. Civil war is only the most extreme aspect of this. Stasis does lead to stasis or a conflict. There's strife. Strife also is close. That strife is a form of stasis. It is a strong thing, but there's also this dispute, small dispute. So there can be stasis on a small scale, stasis on a much larger scale, and then started on the total scale, right? So there's this scale of stasis in Aristotle. That in Hobbes, this automatically leads to that. It's inevitable. So therefore, you must strangle this to prevent that. Whereas Aristotle is saying, oh, you can't escape this. Particularly in defective regimes, you're never going to really affect this. You have to moderate it. You have to balance it. You have to do something to kind of prevent it. You have to mitigate for it. So, let's do this. Whereas happen to engage in stasis, right? Those who are outstanding in virtue would engage in factional conflict more justifiably, yet they do it least of all. For it is most reasonable for these only to be unequal in an unqualified sense. So virtue actually is a form of stasis also. They can be. In other words, the only people who have legitimate reason for this is the virtuous, because the virtuous are few. In other words, they're the only one that's justifiable. Of the one who is truly virtuous, is one. Their dispute against the unvirtuous is a form of factional conflict, and they have this is legitimate. All the other kind of ones are kind of not so legitimate. It's errors. This is correct. A response against that. But the problem here is that he says that this is least. The virtuous are the least to do it, even if they're the most reasonable. For it is reasonable for these to be unequal and in an unqualified sense. The virtue versus the virtue. Those who have virtue versus those who lack it. That's the only real inequality that is kind of legitimate in that sense. All the unequals are not. They're only valid or just in a partial sense, in a qualified sense, not an absolute sense or unqualified sense. He goes, no, therefore that's virtue, right? That's one thing, right? There are also certain persons who are preeminent on the basis of family and claim not to merit equal things on account of this inequality. So one kind of equality. So one thing is this idea of people who are equal or unequal, right? There is this question of equal and unequal. They can be equal and unequal in terms of one is virtue, Then the next base is on family. In other words, their family, the quality of their family. This is the way we would say character, right? We say character, the legitimacy that they have parents. They've long, we know that you've been here, you've been a star. Everyone knows you. You've been many generations, and therefore therefore your family. That's you come from this family that is known, and there's other people who knows who they came from, newcomers or illegitimate or whatever. This again, this is therefore this is a kind of inequality here. They are held to be well-born persons who belong to whom belong the virtue and the wealth of their ancestors. Okay, so that's another aspect of it. So therefore, and that's the last implication is so virtue and wealth. So we have virtue, family, and then wealth. Okay, that's the things that kind of equal and unequal work out of. These then are the manners of speaking, speaking the beginning points and springs of factional stasis. Right, these are the arche, and I think causes springs. This is the Greek word. I think it's the cause of something. Right, this is the springs of factional conflict. Hence, change occurs in two ways. Now, let's look at three here. Factional conflicts, that's the key term in Aristotle's analysis throughout Book 5. It encompasses a range of phenomena from factional political infighting to subversion, rebellion, and civil war. That's my point, right? Revolution is conventional, but all not to get satisfied to metabrale. Okay, it's what I said, in which Aristotle makes clear, encompassing other forms of what may be called constitutional change, less drastic than violent overthrow of a regime. And he makes reference to Keats' argument and I think the commentary on this chapter in Book 5 in this page of this. This is the Oxford commentary series. So let's return to our look at Book 5. So hence change occurs in two ways. Sometimes factional conflict or stasis is with a view to the regime, so that it will be transformed from the established one into another sort. For example, from democracy into oligarchy and from oligarchy into democracy, or from these into a regime or aristocracy, or from the latter into the former, aristocracy to a regime, right? Sometimes it is not with a view to the established regime. In other words, it is sometimes with a view to is not with a view to the established regime, and they intend that the system remains the same, so they keep the regime, but want to have their own hands in, so that they change. So the first one is from one regime to another regime. That's the first change. The second is, well, if they want to keep the regime, they're not going to change the regime. They just want to change who's the people. I want to change I want to be, or my group wants to be the one who controls the regime, then you. Not going to change the regime form. It's from one group to another group. So therefore, in a democracy, we believe the people should rule, but we will say that instead of the farmers, we will say the mechanics should rule. More, the power should go from the farmers to the city dwellers. Okay, that's a change. That is a variation in that sense. Okay, the patuma. In other words, those are in the who's in the patuma. What form of the multitude is in the patuma, right? Or the governing body in that sense, right? As in the case of oligarchy, or in other words, tend to be the same, but they want to have in their own hands. In the case of oligarchy and monarchy, this is the most case. In other words, which oligarch faction? The faction of the oligarchy, they want to control it. And a monarchy, the brother, like the English histories of the Henry the Henriade, when a Brolin book challenges Richard II, right? They don't want to change the monarchy. They just want to say, I'm going to be king, not you, right? So therefore, who's the holder of power? who's going to be the ruler. So therefore, in the democratic, it's the which multitude, but in the oligarchic, which few, who are the few, who are going to be those who are holding the offices, and particularly the more extreme oligarchies. In other words, that if it's dynastic, like which dynasty is going to come to another different sect remove. We're not going to change the dynastic oligarchy, but it's still going to be what's going to happen is a different group is going to do it, right? And then for the case of monarchy, like I said, we talked about the different monarch, right? So further, there may be a factional conflict concerning more or less, for example, where there's an oligarchy to make it more oligarchic or run or less, or where a democracy to make it more democratically run or less. And similarly with the remaining regimes, either to tighten or loosen them. So therefore, in other words, to make it more or less, tightening and loosening of the regime type. So to vary, to cause, to make it more or less the regime, whatever the direction of the regime, right? That's the third. And further, there may be factional conflict with a view of changing a part of the regime, or changing an office, a specific. For example, to establish or abolish a certain office. Some assert that Lysander tried to eliminate the kingship at Sparta, and King Parnassus, the board of overseers, that is the Ephors. In Epidamus, too, the regime was altered. Partly a consul replaced the tribal officials. But it is still compulsory for those of the governing body who hold offices to come to the hall where when there is voting for an office. And the single supreme official also was also an oligarchic feature of that regime. So this is five. The changes described, of which nothing further is known, appears to have been a restricted form of oligarchy, so from a to a moderate form of oligarchy or regime. Right. This is, in other words, in other words, the loosening and tightening of it, of that. In other words, there is this aspect of that. Factional conflict or stasis. Stasis is everywhere the result of inequality. So therefore, there's inequality at any rate where there is no proportion among those who are unequal. A permanent kingship is unequal if it exists among equal persons, right? In other words, he says that there's no proportion among things. In general, it is equality they seek when they engage in factional conflict. So they either, in other words, the question here is that the inequality or equality, those who do want, who think themselves equal, they're unequal. There's someone who has power, they think they're equal to them, therefore that. And then other people who think they're better than them, who they think I'm equal, I want to be better than you, and I should not be equal. This is what equality. If people are equal and I think I'm better than you, I will challenge that. If I think I'm just as good as you, and we're unequal, and I think I'm just as good as you, then I will want to challenge you to do that. So those are the forces of how equality works here. And he goes, equality, it continues this, right? They seek, in other words, in general, it is equality they seek when they engage in factional conflict. Right? This is why people like that, this is the two forces of equality at work. Those who wish to, they're in equality, they like it. Equality is twofold. One is numerical, the other is according to merit. By numerical, I mean the same an equal number or size, but according to merit, being equal in respect to ratio. So therefore, it's either number or size. In other words, equal means either. If one group is more than this, then that's unequal. But then I'm bigger than you and you're smaller. That's equal. So both in number and size is this is what he meant by numerical equality. And then the equal to ratio is about respect merit, the quality of merit. And it means racial. I'm it's proportionate in that sense. There's a ratio here. For example, 3 exceeds 2, and 1 and 2 1 by the equal amount numerically, right? 3 by one number, right? Each one of us, okay? Whereas 4 exceeds 2 and 2 1 by an equal amount, right? 4 to 2, 2 1, 1 to 2, 2 to 4 is they're proportional. They're the same. The, the difference between them are both the same difference. There's two. In other words, you see that the ratio in respect to, in other words, 2 to 1 in an equal amount in respect to a ratio, both being halves. Now, now, while there is an agreement that justice is in an unqualified sense is according to merit, there are differences, and what is said before, some concerning themselves to be equal, generally, um, if they're if they are equal in some respect, while others claim to merit all things unequally if they are unequal in this respect. So yes, merit, but the problem with merit is, remember, people's perception of themselves and their themselves. That if I think that I'm unequal to you, but I think I'm just as good as you, I demand to be treated like you. Okay. Whereas the person who thinks I'm better than you, I think I look at you and I'm you're bad. I don't think you're good. Ooh, I'm richer than you. I'm a more beautiful person than you. In other words, I'm different than you in some degree. I'm unequal to you in some degree, and I see that inequality, and therefore I think because I'm not you and I differ on this inequality, I deserve, and I consider myself better than you. Therefore, I should rule you. I should have authority over you. I should not be treated as you should be treated. So again, that's the difference here. This is this double sense of equality. Hence, two sorts of regimes particularly arise: rule of the people and oligarchy. So therefore, this is this tension here on equality. The question of equality and merit leads to the two regimes. That is. So therefore, the one question is of this equality or inequality leads to what? Equality leads to the rule of the people, and inequality that I believe I'm better than you and I'm the richer, usually richer. This is what it means in that sense. Oligarchy, right? Good birth and virtue exists among few people. These things, these things are among more. These things are among more. Right? In other words, virtue and good birth is like this. And nowhere are there 100 well-born and good persons. Okay, this is like okay, this is. But in many places, the well-off are many. So the well-born and moral persons, good persons, agathos, the well-born, those who are well-born uh, 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 and good, agathos, are not going to be. There's not going to be a lot of them. But there's going to be those who are well off. That can be many. So therefore, so good birth and virtue, excellence, that tied to agathos, being good, um, is always going to be the realm of few. Now he goes, but well off can be many. Okay, wealthy, right? Well off. Yet to have everywhere an arrangement that is simply based on the one or the other of these sorts of equality is a poor thing. In other words, that okay, or in the this idea that if we're going to have an arrangement that is simply based on one or the other of these equalities, this is not a good thing. It is evident from the result that none of these sorts of regimes is lasting. In other words, if you take this idea of this, a regime that takes this kind of concept and it orders of only good people, and that all these regimes don't last in that sense. In other words, the reason for that is that once the first initial error is committed, it is impossible not to encounter some ill in the end. Hence, numerical equality, should be used in some cases, and in other, equality according to merit. So therefore, in other words, all these functions of equality, and there's equality of birth, in other words, wealth, birth, and virtue are going to have it. So that therefore, the question is this one: the inequality and inequality. Now, inequalities is termed within these categories, three categories, and I would even say this is the three categories are also the first category is what we say the material, right? Uh, in an article, I kind of interpret this a little bit. I say that we're dealing with the four causes, Aristotle's four causes, material that we see, and we get the efficient cause with the what is discussed at the end, the next later. But we start out with a understanding of the structures of what's going on here, of what is the dynamic. We looked at the fourfold character of revolution, the four things we'll talk about this political change, of what they are, the four types of this. Now we're talking about the structure of how equality is the main function of this. And it works on these three levels. The inequality that of wealth, one can say that's the materialistic kind of thing. Then family. This is what is this? This is uh, uh, tied with reputation and character and like that, and maybe honor and things like that. Spirit, maybe the thematic, right? And then last but not least, virtue, the mind, the excellence, right? Virtue. We have here the kind of aspect here of this. And then he says, what is that? There's going to be a problem here that even only now, if you don't do it on these claims, you make a claim of a if you haven't if it's not really virtue, but it's based on wealth and family. The problem here is what is it's going to be very difficult to get really well-born people and very good people. It's going to be no. So you got to demand equality on it, then it's going to have an error. Okay, but then if you make the claim of inequality based on an unjust character, it's like virtue. Instead of virtue, you make the claim on wealth or maybe even birth. Um, you are doing what? This is creating an error, and that yes, the initial error, the first and initial error is committed, right? It is not going to get some ill at the end. It's going to create an illness at that point. Hence, numerical equality should be used in some cases. In other cases, according to equality, according to merit, ratio, proportion equality, proportion equality. Nevertheless, democracy is more stable and freer from stasis than oligarchy. So therefore, even though it's a defective regime, it's less defective. It's freer, more stable, and freer from stasis than oligarchy. In oligarchy, two sorts of stasis arise: one in each against each other, and against the people. In democracy, though there is only that against the oligarchy, the rich, there being none. This is what some people argue that could be maybe he's being low or doesn't understand the next side. Among rises against the people, against itself, worth mentioning. In other words, the different multitudes. This is the problem. It's not worth mentioning, but it's there. The different multitude. What happens when the conflict between the urban multitude versus the rural multitude? There's a tension there, and that could be a basis of stasis. He's silent about that. He pays more attention to the. Why is he silent about the multitude, the possible conflict between the multitude? Maybe it's just less likely, or occurs less, or is it that and that therefore the factions of oligarchs will fight, amongst them more commonly? So that's what I think. It's not worth mentioning, he says, right? Moreover, the regime made up of the middling element is closer to the rule of the people than to the rule of the few. And in other words, the regime made up of middling element is closer to the rule of the people than the rule of the few. Ogoi, or few means ogoi. The Greek word is ogoi. The hoi polloi, the many. Hoi ogloi is the few, right? And and this is the most stable of regimes of this sort. So remember in book 4, chapter 11, discussion of the middle. Hence, the middling element is, remember the problem of the poor. We always go back and reread chapter 11. Chapter 11 is key because the rich don't know how to be ruled. They're arrogant. They're aggrandized, and the poor don't know how to. They only know how to follow. They're servile and they don't know how to. They're envious and they're malicious, right? And therefore they don't. These two things are kind of like the instability. These are these extremes. And the middling sort is it has enough. They have enough. They don't want more. They're satisfied with what they have to some degree. They're sufficient. In other words, they're not envious to that same degree the poor are, but they are also capable. They have enough, and therefore they they don't want to take. They don't have the same desire to take that the poor do from the rich, and they don't have too much, so the poor don't go after them. So this is that famous line in chapter 11 of book 4, and that's why this is the most stable of regimes. This thing here, and that therefore this is why and democracy is close to that. Therefore, this is interesting. This is why I think he's silent about the multitude, because the idea here is that the democracies that will be stable will be the one that will provide the least. In other words, the democracy that where the multitude is grasping and poor would be an unstable democracy, whereas the one who has enough, the middling sort, will be the farmers in that sense. They will be the ones who have enough, and they won't be that grabbing and taking. Um, this is where we end up. In the first chapter, we'll stop here. Um, if you have any questions, please post them below. Comments and questions, please put them. I'll respond to them when I see them. If you liked what you saw here, like it, pass it on to a friend. So put it on social media. If you want to do subscribe, please, because by subscribing and get others to subscribe, I want to grow the channel a little bit more so we can maybe become monetized. We hit that magic 1,000. But we'll see. This is a niche topic, and maybe people aren't really that sexy into it. What else? Okay. Didn't like it. Didn't say thumbs down. Say why, please. It's courteous. Say why, because maybe I can learn from it. Maybe I can correct myself and improve. Another thing we can do is if you want to follow me on social media, the links are below. And another way you can do is below listed subscribe on Patreon to help the channel financially. And why is this? Because if you want to contribute, want to help assist this, to keep on doing this, I'm going to do it, but it would be nice if I could afford to do it. Because as this channel grows and the number of videos I produce, I have to start paying. This is YouTube's reality now. It's no longer nice YouTube. I'm too big, and because I'm too big and not getting enough views, I have to subsidize this. And this is really costly. You can help either by doing subscribes to our Patreon. I understand, but you don't do anything for us. There's no special things here. Well, you build it, there will be. Um, uh, I don't. You build it. I'm a reasonable person. A patron is a patron, or someone's helping, I would greatly assist. Another way you can do it is you can always send money by Google Wallet. I'm not going to joke about this, but the other way you can do is buy the book. Buy this book. If you buy this book, Lulu published it. I self-published it. It's a study guide on. It's called the title, "The Notebook for Our House Politics," a workbook. And this is a study guide. It's Cliff's Notes for politics, on our house politics. It's not really a summary. It's kind of like a guidebook guiding you through the politics, book by book, chapter by chapter. with outlines, some summarization with hints and guides to work your way through the text. And with a bibliography, again, I borrowed from someone I got permission to use. I added things to it to make it more useful. Again, for students who are going to be wishing to work with this, and maybe you have to write a paper or something. Think about this, writing an essay and know how to do secondary literature. This is a good study guide, and that for that purposes, and it should be useful. And you buy it by Lulu. I get what the publishers, the distributors get, the bookstores get. I understand you prefer Amazon or other things that will free shipping. Lulu does not give free shipping, but again, if you buy wherever you buy it, that's the way you can help. With that, I end this episode, and have a good day, and see you next time when we look at chapter 2. Bye bye.